Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. Think your HOA is bad? Mine was run by criminals. They denied my roof repairs for years while secretly spending over $50,000 of our money on their own houses. They broke the rules, so I decided to use their own rule book to send them to jail. I never wanted to be involved with my HOA. For the first 8 years I lived in this townhouse community. I paid my dues on time, kept my lawn neat, and generally tried to stay invisible. That's the dream, right? Just live your life without some neighbor with a clipboard telling you your mailbox is the wrong shade of beige. But then my roof started leaking. It wasn't a massive leak at first, just a small water stain on my bedroom ceiling that appeared after a heavy rainstorm. I'm not a homeowner who ignores problems, so I called a roofer to come take a look. He got up there with his ladder and came back down shaking his head. The conversation went something like this. Your roof is shot. These shingles are way past their lifespan. I'm surprised you haven't had more problems before now. I reminded him that I lived in a townhouse community with an HOA that was supposed to handle exterior maintenance, including roofs. That's literally what a chunk of our monthly dues went toward. He shrugged and said I should talk to the HOA about getting it fixed because it was only going to get worse. So I did what any reasonable homeowner would do. I sent an email to our HOA management company explaining the situation and requesting that they schedule a roof inspection and repair. I attached photos of the water damage and the roofer's assessment. I got a response 3 days later from the property manager. She thanked me for bringing this to their attention and said they would add it to the list of maintenance requests. She estimated it would be addressed within the next few months, depending on the budget. A few months seemed like a long time for a leaking roof, but I figured they had a process. I could put a bucket in my bedroom when it rained. Not ideal, but manageable. 4 months went by. The leak got worse. Now it was dripping in 2 places, and I had to move my bed away from the wall. I sent another email. This time I got a response saying they were still reviewing maintenance priorities and my request was in the queue. Another 3 months passed. My ceiling now had significant water damage and I was genuinely worried about mold. I started calling the management company directly instead of emailing. I left messages. Most went unreturned. When someone did call me back, they gave me vague assurances that my roof was on the list and they were working on it. By this point, I was frustrated enough to start asking questions. I requested copies of the HOA budget and financial statements, which as a homeowner I was legally entitled to see. It took 2 more months and 3 written requests before I finally received a massive PDF with hundreds of pages of financial documents. I'm not an accountant, but I know how to read a spreadsheet. I started going through the budget line by line, looking for anything related to roof maintenance or repairs. That's when I noticed something odd. There was a line item for roof repairs that showed a significant amount of money had been spent over the past 2 years. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars. But I knew for a fact that my roof hadn't been touched, and from conversations with neighbors, theirs hadn't either. I dug deeper. The payments were all going to the same roofing company. I looked up the company online and found their website. They seemed legitimate enough. But something felt off. I looked through the financial records more carefully and found the actual invoices attached to the payment authorizations in the HOA files. This was buried deep in the documents, but everything was technically there. Each invoice clearly listed the service addresses. I took photos of these documents with my phone. The invoices showed exactly what work was done at each of the 4 addresses, and fortunately some included photos that the roofing company had submitted with their completion reports. I recognized all 4 addresses immediately. They were the homes of our HOA board members. Let me be clear about what this meant. Our HOA board consisted of 5 people. 4 of them had gotten their roofs completely replaced using HOA funds. Meanwhile, the rest of us in the community with aging, leaking roofs were being told there wasn't money in the budget. I sat at my kitchen table staring at my notes, feeling my blood pressure rising. This wasn't just unfair, this was fraud, this was embezzlement. These people had used money that all of us paid into a shared fund to fix their own homes while ignoring everyone else. I needed to be absolutely sure before I did anything. I drove around the community and looked at the 4 addresses from the invoices. Sure enough, all 4 had beautiful new roofs. They were obvious compared to the older, weathered shingles on the rest of the buildings. The total amount spent on those 4 roofs came to just over $50,000. $50,000 of our money. I was angry, but I'm not someone who acts impulsively. I needed to think about this strategically. If I just sent an angry email to the board accusing them of embezzlement, they could easily cover their tracks or claim there was some legitimate reason for the work. That's when I remembered something from when I first moved into the community. At the annual HOA meeting, they had gone over the governing documents. One of the rules stated that any maintenance decision over $10,000 required approval from the full membership at a properly noticed meeting. I pulled out my copy of the bylaws and confirmed it. Any expenditure over $10,000 for non-emergency repairs needed to be voted on by the homeowners. The board couldn't just decide on their own to spend that kind of money. Not only had they stolen from us, but they had violated the HOA's own rules to do it. I started putting together a plan. I needed to understand the full scope of the problem. I started talking to my neighbors. I didn't accuse the board of anything yet. I just casually asked if anyone else had requested roof work and how it went. It turned out I wasn't alone. At least a dozen other homeowners had requested roof repairs or replacements over the past 2 years. All of them had been told the same thing. Not enough money in the budget. It's on the list. We'll get to it eventually. One neighbor had been waiting for 3 years. Her entire master bathroom ceiling had collapsed from water damage, and she'd had to pay for the interior repairs herself because the HOA wouldn't fix the roof. She had spent over $4,000 out of pocket. Another couple had been told their roof wasn't a priority because it still had a few years left, even though they had visible water damage in multiple rooms. Now I was beyond angry. These board members hadn't just helped themselves to HOA funds. They had actively denied repairs to other homeowners while taking care of themselves first. People were suffering real damage to their homes and spending their own money on repairs that should have been covered by the HOA. I decided it was time to escalate this properly. I wasn't going to confront the board directly. They would just deny everything or try to intimidate me into backing down. Instead, I was going to use the system against them. They loved hiding behind procedures and bylaws when it suited them, so I would follow every single rule and procedure in our governing documents to bring them down. I started by filing a formal complaint with the property management company. I detailed everything I had discovered, attached copies of all my documentation, and demanded that they investigate. I also requested an emergency meeting of the full HOA membership to address the issue. The property management company responded with what I can only describe as bureaucratic nonsense. They thanked me for my concerns, said they would look into it, and suggested I bring up my issues at the next annual meeting, which was still 6 months away. That wasn't going to work for me. So I took the next step. I filed a complaint with our state's Consumer Protection Division that handles HOA disputes and violations. Some states have specific HOA offices, but ours handles them under Consumer Affairs. I sent them everything: copies of the financial records showing the payments, the invoices with addresses and amounts, copies of my denied repair requests, written statements from other homeowners who had been denied, and a detailed explanation of how the board had violated the HOA's own bylaws requiring membership approval for expenditures over $10,000. Within 2 weeks, I got a letter back. The agency was opening an investigation. Around this same time, I decided to inform my fellow homeowners about what was happening. I drafted a letter explaining what I had discovered and printed copies for every unit in the community. I kept it factual and included copies of some of the key documents. I personally delivered them to every mailbox on a Saturday morning. The response was immediate and explosive. My phone started ringing that same afternoon. Neighbors I had barely spoken to before were calling to thank me, to share their own stories of being denied repairs, to express their outrage. Several people said they wanted to help however they could. A few told me they had suspected something wasn't right but never had proof. One woman called me crying. She had been denied roof repairs 2 years ago and had developed a serious mold problem in her home that had made her sick. She'd spent thousands on remediation and had always blamed herself for not pushing harder with the HOA. Now she realized the money that should have fixed her roof had gone to a board member's house instead. By Monday morning, the property management company was flooded with calls and emails from angry homeowners demanding answers. The HOA board called an emergency meeting for that Wednesday evening. They sent out a notice claiming they wanted to address recent concerns and misinformation being spread in the community. I knew exactly what they were going to try to do. They were going to deny everything, claim I had misunderstood the financials, and try to paint me as a troublemaker who was causing problems over nothing. So I prepared. I made copies of every piece of documentation I had. I organized it into folders. I created a simple timeline showing the dates of the roof work, the amounts paid, and the addresses where work was performed. I brought enough copies for every homeowner who attended the meeting. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse. Usually these meetings had maybe a dozen people show up. This time there were over 100 homeowners packed into the room. People were standing along the walls. The energy was tense. The board president opened the meeting by saying they were aware of certain accusations being made and wanted to set the record straight. He claimed that all the roof work had been properly authorized and was part of routine maintenance. Before he could continue, I stood up and asked to speak. He tried to shut me down, saying there would be time for questions later. But other homeowners started calling out, saying they wanted to hear from me now. The room got loud with people demanding I be allowed to talk. Clearly flustered, the board president relented. I walked to the front of the room and laid out everything. I showed the financial records with the line items for roof repairs. I explained how I had found the invoices in the HOA's own files showing work done at 4 specific addresses. I had printed photos of those 4 homes with their new roofs and passed them around. I read from the bylaws about the requirement for membership approval of expenditures over $10,000. I shared stories from other homeowners who had been denied repairs while board members got new roofs. The room was dead silent except for my voice. When I finished, I looked directly at the board and said I had filed a complaint with the state's Consumer Protection Division, and they were currently investigating. The board president's face went pale. The other board members looked at each other nervously. One of them tried to argue that the repairs had been emergencies and couldn't wait for membership approval. I pointed out that emergency repairs are defined in the bylaws as situations involving immediate safety hazards, and routine roof replacements don't qualify. I also noted that if they were truly emergencies, why had other homeowners with leaking roofs been told to wait months or years? Another board member claimed they had gotten special pricing from the roofing company and were testing the quality of their work before authorizing broader repairs. I asked why that testing only happened on board members' homes and why there was no documentation of this testing process in any official minutes or records. I had reviewed every board meeting minute for the past 3 years. There was never a vote, never a discussion, never even a mention of this supposed testing program. They had no good answers. They stammered and contradicted each other and generally made themselves look even more guilty. Homeowners started shouting questions. Why were our dues going to their personal homes? Why had they lied about budget constraints? When were the rest of us going to get our roofs fixed? How long had this been going on? The meeting devolved into chaos. The board tried to regain control but couldn't. People were standing up, yelling, demanding resignations. Eventually, the board members just walked out, claiming the meeting was being conducted improperly and they would reschedule. That was their biggest mistake. Walking out of a meeting they had called in front of over 100 angry homeowners made them look guilty and cowardly. It also gave me the opening I needed for the next phase. Over the next few weeks, the state investigation moved forward. An investigator came out to the community and interviewed multiple homeowners. They reviewed all the financial records and requested additional documentation from the HOA and the property management company. They subpoenaed the HOA's bank records to trace every payment. The investigator also did something I hadn't thought to do. They subpoenaed the HOA's bank records and traced every payment to verify none of the board members had ever reimbursed the HOA for the roof work. They also checked whether any of the board members had declared these roofs as taxable income or reported them in any HOA disclosures. None of them had. There was no paperwork, no reimbursement, no disclosure, just HOA money going out to pay for their personal property improvements. During this time, I also learned that you can request a special meeting of the HOA membership if you get enough signatures from homeowners. The bylaws required 20% of the membership to sign a petition. I organized a group of neighbors, and we went door to door collecting signatures. We got the required signatures in less than a week. People were eager to sign, but I didn't want to make any mistakes. I had come this far by following every rule precisely, so I consulted with an HOA attorney to make sure we were doing everything correctly. The attorney reviewed our petition, reviewed the bylaws, and helped us draft the proper notice for the special meeting. She even agreed to attend the meeting to ensure everything was done by the book. We called a special meeting with one item on the agenda: a vote of no confidence in the current board and the election of an interim board to serve until proper elections could be held according to the bylaws. The current board tried to claim our meeting wasn't valid and refused to attend. It didn't matter. We had followed the bylaws to the letter. The meeting was legitimate whether they liked it or not. Word had spread throughout the community. People who hadn't attended the first meeting had heard what happened and were furious. Over 200 homeowners showed up. We had to move the meeting to a local church that had a bigger hall. The attorney helped us run the meeting using proper parliamentary procedure. We had prepared ballots in advance. Every eligible homeowner got to vote. We voted unanimously to remove the entire board. Not a single person voted against removal. We then held elections for 5 interim board positions. Several people nominated me, and I accepted. We elected 5 new interim board members that night, and I was one of them. Our first official action was to terminate our contract with the property management company that had enabled this corruption and to hire a new company with better oversight and transparency requirements. Our second action was to fully cooperate with the state investigation and provide them with anything they needed. The state investigation concluded about 2 months later. Their findings confirmed everything I had documented. The board had used HOA funds for personal benefit without proper authorization or disclosure. They had violated state HOA regulations and their own governing documents. The amounts were substantial enough to constitute felony theft. The investigator referred the case to the local prosecutor's office for potential criminal charges. It took another year for the criminal case to move through the system. During that time, our new board was able to start addressing the roof situation. We conducted a comprehensive assessment of every roof in the community. We prioritized homes with the most damage and began a systematic replacement program using reserve funds and a special assessment that the membership voted to approve. My roof was fixed within 3 months of the new board taking over. After almost 2 years of fighting with the old board, the new board had it done in less than a season. The water damage to my ceiling was repaired. I could finally sleep in my own bed without worrying about leaks. The prosecutor took the embezzlement case seriously. All 5 former board members were charged with embezzlement and fraud. The amounts involved were significant enough that these were felony charges, not misdemeanors. 4 of the 5 ended up taking plea deals. They pleaded guilty to reduced charges, were ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA for the cost of their roofs, received probation, were hit with substantial fines, and were permanently banned from ever serving on an HOA board again. The former board president decided to fight the charges. I think his ego couldn't handle admitting what he'd done. He went to trial, where all the evidence I had gathered was presented by the prosecution. The financial records, the invoices, the testimony from homeowners who had been denied repairs, the bylaws showing the violations, the complete lack of proper authorization or disclosure. The jury convicted him on all counts. He was sentenced to 18 months in jail and ordered to pay his share of the restitution plus additional fines and court costs. I attended the sentencing hearing. He didn't look at me once. As for the HOA itself, we used the restitution money from the former board members plus our regular maintenance budget and the special assessment to complete the roof replacement program. It took about 2 years to get through the entire community. We hired 3 different roofing companies to handle the volume and got competitive bids for every building. Everyone got new roofs, properly installed, properly documented, and properly paid for with HOA funds used the way they were supposed to be used. My ceiling is repaired, my bedroom is dry, and I sleep well knowing that the people who tried to steal from all of us faced real consequences. The whole experience taught me something important. HOA boards often operate with very little oversight, and some people will absolutely abuse that power if given the chance. But homeowners have rights, and if you're willing to do the work to document problems and follow proper procedures, you can hold corrupt board members accountable. Looking back, I'm glad the board was so blatant about their theft. If they had been smarter about it or spread the benefits around a bit more, they might have gotten away with it. But their greed made them sloppy, and their sloppiness made them document everything in the HOA's own files. The new board operates completely transparently now. We publish detailed financial reports every month on our website. We get multiple bids for any significant work. We hold regular meetings and encourage homeowner participation. We actually follow our bylaws, and we've updated them to add even more safeguards. We made one very specific change to those bylaws. Any board member who requests HOA-funded work on their personal property must recuse themselves from any discussion or vote, and the request must be evaluated by an independent third-party contractor who doesn't know which unit belongs to a board member. The work can only be approved if it's part of a broader community maintenance program that includes multiple units. We're never letting what happened before happen again. Sometimes I think about how this all started because I just wanted my leaking roof fixed. I never intended to become an HOA board member or to send anyone to jail. I just wanted what I was paying for, a well-maintained home in a fairly run community. But when people in power abuse that power, sometimes the only option is to use the system against them. The board had spent years hiding behind bylaws and procedures to deny homeowners their rights. They loved citing rules when it benefited them. So I used every single rule in our governing documents against them. They wanted everything done by the book? Fine. I followed every procedure, filed every form, met every requirement, and documented everything to the letter. I got an attorney to verify I was doing it right. I got signatures. I filed complaints. I held proper meetings with proper notice. They couldn't complain about my methods because I was doing exactly what the bylaws required. Every step I took was technically correct, properly documented, and completely within the rules they claimed to follow. And that kind of malicious compliance with every rule and regulation is exactly what it takes to bring corrupt people down. The next one is a pro-revenge story. When I moved into my suburban neighborhood, I expected peace and quiet. Instead, I walked into a petty dictatorship run by our HOA president, Todd. Todd was the worst kind of leader, the kind who loved power but hated accountability. He enforced ridiculous rules, like fining people $200 for leaving their trash cans out a minute past 9 a.m., but blatantly ignored the rules when it suited him. His own yard was a mess of unpermitted structures, and his fence was taller than allowed by city ordinances. But Todd's true sin, using the HOA as his personal piggy bank. At first I tried reasoning with him. My fence was slightly off color because the approved stain wasn't available, and he fined me $500. I explained, provided receipts, and asked for leniency. Todd smirked, said, "Rules are rules," and walked away. That's when I decided I would take him down. Not with screaming or public arguments, but methodically, legally, and in a way he'd never recover from. Step 1. Become the inside man. Todd's first mistake was underestimating me. I volunteered for the HOA board under the guise of wanting to get involved in the community. I played the part of the eager, naive newbie perfectly. For 2 years, I attended every meeting, quietly observing how Todd operated. I learned he controlled the board by bullying other members and burying them in paperwork. He'd push through votes when only his allies were present and conveniently lose paperwork submitted by dissenting homeowners. I kept my head down, took detailed notes, and waited. My goal was to outlast his term as president so I could begin making changes. Then I discovered Todd's second mistake. He wasn't just a bully, he was a thief. Step 2. Follow the money. Todd loved to brag about how he kept the HOA's finances in order, but something didn't add up. The annual HOA fees were high, much higher than in similar neighborhoods, but the common areas were falling apart. The pool was closed half the summer due to maintenance issues, and the landscaping looked like it hadn't been touched in months. I started digging. As the HOA treasurer, Todd had access to all the accounts, but he was notoriously cagey about sharing financial details. I asked for the budget during a meeting, and Todd laughed it off, saying, "Don't worry, I've got it under control." I filed a formal request for the financial records, which under HOA rules he was required to provide. Weeks went by with no response. That's when I started talking to neighbors. Turns out I wasn't the only one suspicious. Over a dozen homeowners had requested access to the budget over the years only to be ignored. One neighbor claimed Todd had used HOA funds to install a new patio at his house, while another swore he'd seen Todd's kids at the community pool during its maintenance closure. Armed with these suspicions, I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, forcing Todd to provide the records. He stalled, but I wasn't backing down. Step 3. Build the case. When Todd finally handed over the financial documents, they were a mess. Invoices were missing, payments were mislabeled, and some expenses were downright bizarre. A $15,000 landscaping fee paid to a company that didn't exist. Thousands spent on administrative costs with no explanation. I cross-referenced the HOA's bank statements with public records and found the smoking gun. Todd was funneling money to his personal accounts. Even better, I discovered Todd had been inflating contractor fees, pocketing the difference, and splitting the profits with his buddy, a shady contractor who handled most of the HOA's maintenance. I compiled everything into a detailed report, complete with spreadsheets, photos, and notarized statements from neighbors who had seen Todd's antics firsthand. Step 4. The coup. I waited for the annual HOA meeting, which was typically a snooze fest attended by only a handful of homeowners. But this time, I made sure people showed up. I spent weeks knocking on doors, explaining what Todd had been up to. I didn't share everything, just enough to get people angry and curious. On the night of the meeting, the room was packed. Todd started the meeting like usual, droning on about how difficult it was to manage the HOA and how much he'd sacrificed for the community. That's when I stood up. I calmly asked if he could explain some discrepancies in the budget. Todd laughed nervously and said, "I don't think this is the time or place." I replied, "Actually, Todd, it's the perfect time." I handed out copies of my report to everyone in the room. The mood shifted instantly. People started reading, whispering, and then shouting. Todd tried to regain control, but it was too late. I called for a vote to remove him as president. By the end of the night, Todd was out. Step 5, the final blow. After Todd was removed, we hired an independent auditor to go through the HOA's finances. They confirmed everything. Todd had embezzled over $50,000, mismanaged tens of thousands more, and committed multiple counts of fraud. We reported him to the police and filed a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen funds. But it didn't end there. Todd's shady contractor buddy was also exposed and banned from doing business in the county. Todd had to sell his house to pay restitution and legal fees. His name became a running joke in the neighborhood, and no one would touch him professionally. With Todd gone, we restructured the HOA to prevent another dictator from taking over. We implemented term limits, required multiple board members to approve financial decisions, and created an online portal so all homeowners could access budgets and meeting minutes. The aftermath. Every time I walk past Todd's old house, now owned by a lovely family, I smile. The pool is open, the landscaping is beautiful, and the HOA fees are lower than ever. Todd, meanwhile, moved to a neighboring town, where he reportedly tried to join another HOA board, only to be laughed out of the room when someone Googled his name. Justice wasn't just served, it was plated, garnished, and savored. The next one is a malicious compliance story. A little bit of background. Due to horrible teachers and my easily intimidated personality, I developed a fear of making mistakes because I was constantly yelled at whenever I made one. My body began trying to avoid school and the stress that came with it by developing a habit of vomiting. That proved to my mother that I was sick, so I could stay home. The problem is that my body still tries to do this whenever I become extremely stressed. Nowadays, I can suppress the habit to a certain degree if I focus on my breathing and close my eyes. Sooner or later, though, I have to leave the stressful situation or I will vomit. Now, for a little German background, since I do not know whether this concept exists in other countries, we call it Zeitarbeit, which Google translated as temporary employment. Basically, instead of applying directly to the company where you want to work, you apply to a temporary employment company, which I will call the ZC. The ZC then finds jobs for you. You go to the ZC and provide all the important information they need to find you a job you will not completely hate. If they find something, they call you, and you have an interview with the company where you may be placed. If you agree to work there, you become a temporary employee for 6 months. After those 6 months, the company either lets you go because they believe it is not working out, or they hire you directly and you receive a permanent position. In theory, that sounds awesome. In practice, companies save money by releasing temporary employees and replacing them with new ones. So your chances of being kept are almost non-existent. During those 6 months, they also do not need a real reason to let you go. They can simply say, "It did not work out." Now to the story. At the first 2 jobs I received through the ZC, I tried extremely hard to impress the companies. I worked overtime, handled tasks outside my job description, always arrived on time, and never called in sick. I ignored my mental health problems and drowned them at home so I could endure everything at work. However, I would not be posting here if either company had hired me. This story happened in 2018 at my 4th job, which was in a factory where I packed and sorted products. By then, I was far less enthusiastic. I refused overtime and stayed within my job description, but I was still always on time and completed my 40 hours every week. However, the manager demanded overtime almost every day. I was not going to do it, especially not for minimum wage. She did not like that, but I was still performing my job properly, so I believe she planned to keep me for the full 6 months before letting me go. Then I made the absolutely fatal mistake of daring to become sick. I developed a cyst very close to my private area. I could barely walk, stand, or even sit. Lying down was uncomfortable, but at least it was not painful. I went to the doctor, received antibiotics, and was given a medical note excusing me from work for 7 days. 5 days were for the antibiotics, followed by 2 more days to determine whether they had helped enough. I called my workplace and told them I would be off sick for a week, but my manager demanded that I deliver the medical note to her in person. Otherwise, she said she would fire me immediately. I was annoyed, exhausted, and in pain, but because I was only in my second month of working there, I agreed. My parents drove me to the factory. I waddled through the building like a bow-legged penguin until I reached her office. She did not see me walking because she was busy writing something. I placed the doctor's note on her desk beside several other documents. She looked up at me and started talking. She talked a lot. You can imagine the most condescending Karen tone possible. She began lecturing me about how much she disliked that I refused to work overtime. Then she accused me of being lazy and claimed I had gone to the doctor just to obtain a week of paid vacation. She told me I needed to improve my work ethic and that my chances of being hired permanently were already extremely slim. According to her, I needed to give 110% if I wanted even the slightest chance of staying. The pain around my private area was getting worse because I was standing, so after a while I barely listened to her. However, I noticed that her voice was getting louder and louder. Somehow, she had talked herself into a rage and was nearly yelling by that point. Then I felt my stomach begin to turn. I started using my usual methods to calm it because I assumed she would only complain for another few minutes before allowing me to leave. I tried to interrupt her and explain that I needed to go home and rest, but she refused to listen. Instead, she interrupted me and told me how disrespectful it was to interrupt someone. The irony. Cue my malicious compliance. I stopped trying to calm my stomach and allowed it to do whatever it wanted. Surprise, surprise! Less than a minute later, everything came out. I vomited across her desk, covering several of her documents and half of my doctor's note. Her expression was absolutely priceless, although I wish I could have enjoyed it more considering the pain I was in and the new taste in my mouth. After her initial shock and silence, she finally sent me home to rest. I still think about that moment to this day. After the week was over, I returned to work feeling mostly healthy. I was immediately called into her office, where she and another boss or manager were waiting for me. After some back-and-forth discussion, they asked why I had not even attempted to turn away when I vomited, since I had apparently damaged or destroyed several important documents. Even though I was not obligated to explain myself, I told them about the cyst and how I had been unable to walk, stand, or turn around without experiencing severe pain. Reaching the nearest restroom or trash bin would have been impossible. I also pointed out that I should never have been there in the first place because a doctor's note could legally be handed in after I returned to work. The other manager looked extremely angry with my manager. After more unimportant back-and-forth discussion, I returned to work. I was still released after the 6-month period ended, but I was not sorry to leave that job. Afterward, I decided to begin focusing on my mental health and my addiction problem. One final fact. The manager left the company shortly after I did, and the factory was demolished at the end of 2024. According to some of my former colleagues, the company was constantly firing and hiring people, while more and more employees were choosing to quit on their own. Anyway, thank you for watching.